Hey, welcome to DC Signal to Noise on this Friday afternoon. Thanks for joining us on the live stream here. And Jim, this is one of those Fridays where you get the feeling anything could happen on this one.
It could be glitchy, as we say, right?
It could be glitchy. It could be gold. It could be a little both. I don't know.
Okay.
But no, we've already been having way too much fun this afternoon. But thanks for joining us. As always, be sure to start commenting early. Send us your questions early so we can get to them in the conversation. Just drop them in the comments there on Facebook. And please do join us every Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Those that are on, any questions right off the bat that you want us to hit before we get started? And Jim, anything you want to add to the list for today?
Well, we had a segment on AgriTalk on that Washington State, dairy worker overtime issue. So I checked into it a little bit. So I'll have some comments on that.
Okay, great. And we'll also, just so you all out there know what's on the list so far, we'll talk about some of the deadlines coming up that are important in the presidential election and how that process is playing out and likely will play out. Jim, I want to get your take on what is the goal of the Rudy show. This is, it was insane yesterday. We'll talk about that and where they're trying to get to on that. COVID aid, as always, what are the prospects for that? Where do we stand? There's some issues with Commodity Credit Corporation funding. We'll talk about that. China took a big leap this week in trying to be a global leader on trade. And so we'll have a good discussion about that. I want to talk about some of the end of this year. We have just had a complete 180 in optimism in agriculture, and there's good reasons for it. And it's a surprising and welcome lift here at the end of the year. And then, as you mentioned, we're also going to talk about that the overtime issue with Wisconsin dairies, and also how that could spill into some other industries as well.
Washington State dairies.
Washington State dairies, yes.
Yeah.
So anything you want to add to that list, drop us a comment in the comments there, and we will add it on there. With that, you ready to get started, Jim?
Ready. Here we go.
All right, here we go in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to DC Signal to Noise on to this Friday. I'm John Harris, joined by Jim Wiesmeyer. And as always, we're going to try to separate out the signal from the noise going in Washington over the last week. Before we get to that, Mr. Wiesmeyer, there's been something I've been meaning to bring up on here for a few weeks now, and I keep forgetting, and I think we need to. Just to show your expertise in separating signal from noise, and how it's even recognized by the robots. We often take these segments that we record here at AgriTalk and elsewhere and run them through an automated transcription service called Otter. And Eric, our producer, if you would go ahead and bring up that slide and show what Otter took Jim Wiesmeyer to be on a recent AgriTalk segment. That's right. It's not Jim Wiesmeyer. It's Jim Way Smarter.
Well, what's the glitch in that? I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's a very accurate transcriptor.
I think it was spot on, huh? Yeah, all right. It's all right, Jim. Way Smarter. Let's get into the Way Smarter issues of the week.
Now I'm under the gun.
That's right. You better perform. All right. I lost my list. Let me bring it up here real quickly. Before we get into that, though, just a reminder for those who are listening to the podcast, if you haven't yet started joining with us on the live broadcast, join the AgriTalk Facebook page, 2 p.m. Eastern every Friday, except for next Friday. We won't be here next Friday. We'll have a week off for the holiday. But 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday, 1 p.m. Central, and you can be a part of the show, watch us live if you care to see these old ugly faces, but also more importantly, you can send us comments and questions and be a part of the conversation. So let's get into it, Jim, and let's talk about the presidential race. We're nearing some key deadlines here that should put to bed some of the back and forth, or not much forth, but a lot of back coming from the Trump administration. As we get near the end of the month, most of the states will have certified. And of course, the big deadline of December 14th, when the electors certify the race. Does that officially put this thing to bed?
December the 14th does, and actually the state certifications. It should, yes. And what we've seen over the past few weeks, this is a sensitive issue. We can all tell from the emails we get. But yes, some of these irregularities are perceived should have been checked out. But you also, in the courts, have to have proof. So we are going to see. The courts have not ruled in the Trump's team favor in a number of cases, many cases, by the way, if not all.
Yeah, latest count I think I heard was 2 for 39.
Yes. But also what has been perplexing to me, well, it should have been perplexing, it's Trump 101, is how open the charges have been in the public. I mean, because it does rabble rouse it, John. And, I liked a lot of the Trump's tweets before, to tell you the truth, because he went over and above the very, very biased major media. But boy, some of the statements or the charges on how the election transpired did I think add to the negativity of the whole process. So if that was
and absolutely no basis for many of them.
No, it wasn't.
No basis for many of the charges.
Proof. You need proof. And again,
but it goes beyond that, Jim.
Yeah,
it goes beyond that. It wasn't even that there wasn't proof. There wasn't even anything to begin, other than something somebody said on social media. There was no there on a lot of these, even to begin with, even to start the rabble rousing on them.
Yeah, but you're not going to convince the majority, not some, the majority of Trump voters, because the minds are set on this one. That's what I hear based on telephone conversations and emails. This is just he said, she said, and the many Republicans just will not believe anything if Trump is not declared the victor, John. That's it.
Well, and is that what's behind this press conference from Rudy Giuliani yesterday, presenting all kinds of wild new theories, just trying to keep this alive, the notion that the election wasn't fair, so that Donald Trump can go off in the sunset and say he was robbed of the election, and keep the fight going in the media after his presidency's done?
That's the signal I got. Yeah. The signal was noise, but that's the signal I got. Yeah.
Well, but it also plays into the financial future for Donald Trump, doesn't it?
It does. But what needs to be done in all practicality is for Congress to hold hearings next year as soon as possible, and get the reviews of what happened and what did not happen, but come to put their arms around the early voting, the sending out the ballots, etc. Is this going to be the norm now? If you don't have standards, we're going to be right back into this each major election. And we're going to see the number of ballots in these two Georgia runoff races. That's already a question, John.
Yeah, indeed. And I would agree with you that, of course, it ought to be done every 4 years, that we go through and do a postmortem on the election cycle and see what worked, what didn't, and what needs to be reviewed. And I would agree that the landscape has changed so dramatically in 2020 that, yeah, we ought to be looking more closely at how to make sure that the mail ballot system is effective. If there is a path forward to go to some sort of a remote electronic voting, all of those kinds of things that we should look at and find a resolution to before 2024.
Yes, and standards for softwares that's driving the machine that has to get clearance from the states using them, rather than to disregard that specification, like apparently some states, did not do. But at least that would put that, hopefully, to rest if you have standards in the software.
Yeah, and I would underline standards and not standard software, because one of the greatest strengths of our voting system is that it is so spread out among various stakeholders, various agencies, among the various states. And so there is no easy way to attack the election process as a whole, because you have to impact so many different points of entry into that election system. So I think having separate election systems is a great, tremendous strength in our election process.
Absolutely. We just need to feel confident as voters on both sides of the major parties feel that there's integrity in the system. It's not there now.
Right. But I mean, let's face it, a lot of the doubt in the integrity of the system has been sown by President Trump and his team in this election cycle.
As there was animosity from actually before Trump was elected in 2016. We saw many try to get at him before and for years after he was president. So, this, country has to, become a more cohesive whole when it comes to elections, because we're just not there now.
Indeed. And a good question here from Gary coming in. Anyone talking about using blockchain going forward in voting? Easiest way to fix this and build confidence in the system. I know there's people looking at it who are much smarter than Jim and I, even though Jim is way smarter. But I don't know that they have found a solution that would be universally welcome yet. It'll be interesting to see if they can do that within the next 4 years.
And I know a couple of the pollsters, and they're humble now after their horrible results from the last election. And I'll ask them your question. I think that it's an excellent point to bring up.
Yeah, it is. And certainly blockchain opens up a lot of different possibilities, and voting security would certainly be one of them. So how do you see the rest of this playing out, Jim? I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is not going to concede the election. What happens when this comes to a head on December 14th?
Well, you have to hold your breath to see what Trump says after that. I mean, but the directions are clear. What happens? We can officially call Biden president-elect. That's been a sensitive issue because I know the fervency on the part of Trump supporters. They did not like to even see or read President-elect Biden until the December 14th announcement. I understand that. And in my writing now, I have gone to that, where I didn't at the beginning because I think it was clear, but still, I acknowledge the emotion and the pain out there. But December the 14th, we'll have a president announced. So they become president-elect until inauguration date, January 20th.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how both camps respond to those events as they play out over the next few weeks.
And we get the transition going. I mean, that's important too. Hopefully we won't have to wait until December the 14th or thereafter to really get the mechanics of a transition period through, because that would be pretty late, although it's been done before after the Florida vote. But there was transition, things going on even in the year 2000. So this is the exception to not hardly have any transition, between the two political parties.
Yeah, and I think that's worth pointing out, that because a lot of people do point back to 2000. Well, in 2000, the Clinton administration, of course, Al Gore as vice president was receiving the public daily briefing and other transition tools, if you will. And as that court case wore on and the recounts wore on, the Clinton administration actually decided that it has been going on too long, that was putting transition in peril, and started providing the public daily briefing and other transition tools to George Bush before that court case was settled. So, to say that things were delayed in 2000, so they should be delayed now, that's not really analogous.
True. But we're in a different era now, and hopefully there'll be more cooperation from now on. Let's hope, because we've seen the downside of this. I think any president who gets as many votes any would-be president who gets as many votes as Biden got should have a transition period as ASAP. But it's just been a wrong decision by the Trump administration, period.
Yeah, well, and the Trump administration said, well, what does it hurt to take the time to look closely at the balloting? I think everyone agrees there. At the same
There's
time,
no
what does
question.
it hurt? What does it hurt to give the information and access to the Biden team, given what we know about the election count at this point?
Agree.
All right. Well, let's move on to COVID aid. We've been talking about this for seemingly ever now. And it doesn't seem like that issue advanced at all this week. You've got Senate Republicans still saying they want to keep a very I was going to say a very low number, but it's not a low number. It's just a comparatively low number for that bill, while Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats seem to be locked in at keeping that bill as high as possible. So it doesn't really seem like there's any movement towards finding something in the middle here, Jim.
Not yet. You've got some people in the White House saying they still want a real quick skinny bill of $1.5 trillion. I think I got.
But you don't
that
get you don't get Pelosi or the Senate Republicans with that.
No. So we're going to see. Now, Chuck Schumer, who's the minority leader in the Senate from New York, said last night, I don't think it was correct, that the congressional leaders from both parties and chambers would meet either today or soon. But the Republicans came out and said no. What we're meeting on is the omnibus budget bill that will fund fiscal year 2021, which started October 1. So there's even differences, John, on whether or not either they met on COVID aid or will meet. But let's get to the bottom line. The signal I'm clearly getting, John, on this is there will be an eventual COVID aid stimulus package. We just don't know when and what it contains. Now, farmers and ranchers want to know a couple of things. Will there be additional aid in there? Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, said this morning at a presser that she wants additional food aid. Now, that usually means food stamp, additional food stamp funding, and maybe a repackaged, food package, program that they've operated prior.
The food boxes, yeah.
Yeah, the food boxes. But again, what happened also, I don't want to get too wonky on you, but the Treasury Department...
You can never get too wonky on this show. Come on. That's wonky is where we live.
Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin yesterday in the White House pulled back on some of the tools that the Federal Reserve has been using relative to COVID aid, and not directly, but that surprised people, and so we're still trying to find out why would they want to have signaled that, even though some of these programs have not been utilized that much, but. The coming COVID aid package and stimulus package, I like to say, will be a targeted one, John. There will be additional funding for the payment protection program, but I think it'll be geared much more to smaller businesses and other people, and it'll be an accelerated process from what we've seen, prior to that. Relative to any farmer payments, I get mixed comments on that, primarily as a result of the really run-up we've seen in the commodity markets, especially the corn and soybean markets and wheat, to a degree over the past month or so.
Indeed, a couple observations in that. Could it be possible, because I think the administration is trying to pull back some, what was it, like $428 billion from the Fed in those programs. Could it be that they're trying to find dollars that they can pull back into a new COVID aid package that wouldn't be seen as new money by Senate Republicans?
That could be. But now the Federal Reserve, there's some observers saying since that money was already authorized, they can just not follow what the White House has said. So that's going to be curious to see how that unfolds. But a number of people in the financial markets, when you because before, John, the Mnuchin was working very closely with the Federal Reserve, head, Jerome J. Powell.
Right.
But this starts putting another uncertainty into the marketplace, and that's the last thing we need right now. But again, I want to come back is we will get an additional stimulus package. Don't know when, and the dollar amount. It could be the initial down payment that we talked about last week, which I still am holding out odds for, and then come back early next year when we have additional information and some more team members, such as a Biden transition team to consult with as well. We're going to see. Now, farmers have also been asking about, what about the Commodity Credit Corporation Act funding? It looks like that may be bumped into the omnibus spending bill that they are talking about, both political parties, John. What the dollar amount, will it just be the replenishment back to the $30 billion borrowing authority? Again, a question mark, whether it will go above that. And also, will any lawmakers put stipulations on the use of those CCC funds? I know there'll be an effort by some, Democrats to make specific language to have CCC funding authorized for a carbon credit bank. We're going to see if that flies. There will be other stipulations, perhaps from outgoing House Ag Committee Chairman Colin Peterson, to insert language on the use of CCC funding with consultations with the leaders of the House and Senate Ag Committee. Those are unknowns right now, but we'll be looking at the specific language whenever they release it officially.
Is that CCC funding as critical right now? Because, I mean, it's doubtful that the Biden administration is going to look at programs like CFAP or Market Facilitation Program or anything like that would tap into CCC. So is there as an urgent need to get that borrowing limit back up at this point?
Oh, I think President Trump, I would say the Democrats, if they indeed are coming in, President Trump showed them the money machine that's called CCC. And they could have a whole list of things they want to do relative to a revised ag and food policy, and perhaps tapping into the CCC. You already saw it in some of the transition reports coming into the Biden people relative to tapping the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act for that, ag carbon bank, John.
Interesting.
Yes.
All right. Circling back to COVID aid. So you think that, just to be clear, you think there will be some sort of package before Christmas?
I think so, but I weakly believe that. This is all politics all the time, even more so now, and it's really tied into this Georgia runoff races, both of them. Believe it or not, does Nancy Pelosi want to keep up there with their $2.4 trillion package to show how meager?
Don't cut her short.
No, it was 3.4, but then they came back and clarified that, John.
Oh, okay. All right.
Late after we went to press, if you will. They initially said 3.4 trillion, but now it's back to the 2.4 to 2.5 trillion dollars. Their last one that they pushed, but they did clarify that I think last Friday evening. But that's some of the reports you get that the Democrats may use this as a Georgia runoff election issue, but it's also increasing pressure on the White House to get some sort of aid package out there for the two Republican candidates in those Georgia runoff elections. So I think that race now is, actually boosting the odds for some sort of package, whether it be a quote skinny one or a full-fledged one.
All right. And how does the omnibus spending package tie into the COVID aid decision?
Well, it's got CCC Charter Act, and there's always surprises in a omnibus spending bill, things that they didn't want to put in a COVID aid package because it was too policy oriented, that they'll shift to the omnibus spending bill. That may be the last train out of the shop, or it could include the COVID aid package, the omnibus.
Well, that's where I was getting to. Can they wrap it in?
I can't rule that out. It could be wrapped in. Those are the options that are clearly in front of them, and I don't think any final decisions have been made.
And again, the deadline for that is what,
December the 11th. December
11th. Okay.
December the 11th. Yes. And they'll want, the closer you get to hearing the bells of Christmas, they want to get out of town. They want to get out of town, because so that's a little charger, if you will, to get them to act so they can get out of town, John.
So things will get more serious once we come back from Thanksgiving.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. They'll want to get going, and after really after December 14th. I mean, you could, because of the announcement of President-elect Biden, I don't think you're going to see much really until the middle of December.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about this Washington State overtime rule. This is a court ruling saying that dairies in Washington State have to pay overtime. In fact, you and I talked to Dwayne Faber, a dairyman out in Washington State, this morning on AgriTalk. He said one of the judges on the panel suggested that workers could go back and sue for the past 3 years of overtime. Boy, Jim, this could be a big hit to not just dairies in Washington State, but ultimately just about every ag enterprise in Washington State.
Yeah. Now, a couple of lawyers I talked to say that they did not specifically say, touch on the back pay. So that remains to be seen on that one. And then, they ruled that Washington State dairy farmers are entitled to overtime pay if they work more than 40 hours a week. And the dissenting justices, you always have to look at what they're saying too, because this was a close decision, said there was no right to overtime under Washington State law. The court not only tossed out the exemption the state legislature in Washington State passed in 1959, but from an important perspective, John, it ignores a federal exemption passed by Congress. But, we heard remarks this morning that the ruling could provide a template for extending the overtime to other states. But again, I was told the majority did not say whether the workers would be able to collect back pay. So that's going to be challenged if they try that. But other people in Washington State are saying, well, that can be addressed in future legislation. But to me, the way I read this, it applies directly only to the dairy industry.
At this moment, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. For the past 60 years, state law, like federal law, has exempted farm workers. But this ruling was 5-4, and it's going to be appealed. This thing, I just don't see this being the law of the land. California is phasing in some overtime, time protections, I found out, while New York this year began requiring overtime when farm workers work more than 60 hours in a week. And Maryland and Minnesota also offer overtime, protections to farm workers. But, there's problems galore with this, John, even in Washington State. What if you're part of a farm crew, and 99%, by the way, of all farm workers in Washington State are Latinos? I found that of note. But what if you're on a crew and your job is to sweep the barns out? Are you part of the overtime pay? Is this a dangerous job? Now we were told this morning that dairies it would mean a higher labor cost. Again, I looked back. Washington State dairy farms already pay $18 to $20 an hour for all hours worked. Paying time and a half would be $27 to $30 above 40 hours per week. And we were told this morning that there's end arounds. He didn't specify what ends around were. Well, one would be limiting the harvest or leaving crops to rot, absorbing the extra labor cost, or hiring additional workers to avoid incurring overtime payments, yeah, try to do that with the workforce that's hard to get now. There's already a shortage of agriculture, labor. So,
Or also setting the base rate so that when you mix in the overtime hours, the overall payment equals what it would have been before.
yes. So this is Washington State, but boy, I don't see this spreading to too many other states, and I think it could be struck down by a higher court because of what I went through before. We'll see.
All right. We'll keep our eyes on it.
Interestingly so, I did check with Farm Bureau National and ask if they had a statement about this. So because that would be interesting. This is called a dilemma for a national organization. And they said they had no statement, but to contact Washington State Farm Bureau, of which I will do. I just didn't have time, this morning to do that.
Certainly. All right. And Pat, I appreciate the comment, but I'm not sure I understand it. So if you want to clarify a little further, we'd be sure to take up your issue there. And anybody else that has a question or comment, feel free to drop them in the chat function. Jim and I'll chew it over. Jim, this week, China took a big leap in trying to present themselves as the global leader in trade and really try to usurp the United States position there. Tell us about this global trade pact that is centered around China.
Well, it doesn't include the U.S., it doesn't include India, it doesn't include Canada, but includes 30% of the GDP, and that's a lot. Now, I think it's more of a signal of China's intentions for the years ahead, much like they have been doing the past few years, John, on signaling being a creditor to a number of nations with stipulations. By the way, I just think this is on their road from a geopolitical basis to show that they want to be just as powerful as the U.S. As far as the body of the agreement, an acronym is RCEP. It's okay, but there's lower tariffs in a number of areas in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and a number of these countries also have bilaterals, with each other that in some cases are better than the RCEP, and China didn't give all that much, to tell you the truth. So I think the signal is more show, but yet it should send a signal to the U.S. and its our allies that China is going to continue to be aggressive on the world front.
Well, and it comes at a time, and China is taking advantage of this, that the WTO has been weakened in some large part by the United States. The United States position has been weakened by the notion that we're going to pursue unilateral rather than bilateral, multilateral trade deals. So they're trying to take the position that they can set the global framework for trade and try to fill that void.
Yes, and as Sean Haney pointed out on AgriTalk, he thought there's a better dispute resolution, program in the body of the RCEP and some definitions of terms, embodied in that. Well, let's hope that's the case, because the dispute resolution in the World Trade Organization is one of the several reasons why the Trump administration moved significantly away from the WTO, which really needs reformed. And you'll probably see a push by that, by any Biden administration.
Yeah, indeed. I'd agree with that. So we'll keep our eyes on this and see how it develops there. And I think it's also going to be interesting to see, Jim, how the Biden administration responds to this, particularly if they do try to get into, I can't remember all the letters that go into the new TPP, but whatever we're calling TPP now.
CPTPP, comprehensive something. We have to blame Canada for that, because I was told Trudeau wanted to change the name TPP to CPTPP. We're going to have to ask Sean Haney about that on the next AgriTalk.
Well, we don't have to ask him. We'll just blame Canada no matter what.
Yes.
All right. Let's see. The last thing I have on my list is actually I want to. First let's look at Pat is weighing back in. Dealer trust, big deal in cattle legislation, changes GIPSA, lean back to cattle seller from dealer's banker. I'm going to admit I am not the best person to talk about cattle, other than I think you're trying to get at some of the transparency rules that are being put forward to try to get price transparency back into cattle. Is that what you take from that, Jim?
I do. I do. And I think in my speeches, virtual now, I tell industry stakeholders that this is not a Democrat or Republican issue now. The livestock industry is going to be really focused on by Washington, both from the administration, executive branch, and the legislative branch in the price transparency, perhaps antitrust concerns in the COVID aid area. Are the meat packers doing what they should be doing now, which is much better than it was when COVID-19 first developed? These are not going to go away, and I think anytime you should want more price transparency. So there'll be additional hearings, but I think you'll have legislation in the new Congress beginning next year.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of proposals put forward in Congress this year, plus a proposal drafted by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I'm no expert on beef and livestock policy, but I get the sense that none of the proposals that have come forward so far really are embraced as being a complete solution for the problem.
No, but I do like NCBA's approach that voluntary, but if certain guidelines are not followed, then they'll turn to Congress. So I like that carrot and stick approach. So that's the industry trying to deal with it itself. I don't think it's just a delaying concept, but I fully respect other sides saying enough already. We need more cash market transactions. We need more transparency. And that, by the way, is led by Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa.
Yeah, but let's recognize. I mean, yes, I think everyone involved in the industry right now agrees that there's not enough transparency to truly discover a market price on cattle right now. But the flip side of that is that the system that we have does remove some degree of volatility.
Not only that, because to me, a good marketer in agriculture would say they like market volatility because it allows you hopefully to price during emotional days up in the marketplace. You don't want a flat market. That would be like the 1960s all over again in the cash grain markets, just dull. So I can see that side where I'm a friend of volatility, but it's not easy some days to deal with it. But still, it gives you opportunity to market your crops or livestock.
All right. Well, Jim, let's end with a high note here. And I know you and I have both noticed this really dramatically in the last couple of weeks, that the sentiment in agriculture has it's just like coming out of a funk into the sunshine. When you combine the commodity prices that we've seen, particularly in soybeans, and the CFAP 2 payments coming out at the same time, there is an optimism out there and a pent-up spending spree that we haven't seen for close to 5 years.
Yeah, pent up. You saw the number of combines, the percentage increase in the number of purchases of new combines. And then last week, I think it was on AgriTalk, we had Paul Neiffer on, where he said he had a number of clients wanted to postpone selling their corn and soybeans because they don't need any more income this year. Now, that's not, boy, I haven't heard that for a while.
Well, I heard the same from a couple of farm credit execs this week.
Yes, absolutely. That's good to me, but it shows you there's going to be some widening of bases early next year when some of this grain comes back onto the market. The so-called January, February break will come at us maybe with gusto, but also, how often it's almost like a macro key. As a writer, we have macro keys where we heard, from Pam Johnson and other good farmers that we want the price from the marketplace, not from income transfer payments. Well, You're getting it from the marketplace. We had the World Board, Mark Jakanowski, chairman, say that he thinks there could be, he said record major crop acres in 2021 due to the current price situation. I think what he meant was combined corn and soybean acres could be record. Yeah. That tells me that you're going to get a competition for acres, and boy, that's a good sign. We haven't had that for a while, so we'll see if that carries into early in 2021. But you've got soybeans, as you said, nearing $12. Mm-hmm. And then you've got corn. Boy, I'm going on memory here. Almost
430.
Almost 430. Almost 430. Yeah. And wow, that's profitable for many producers. I don't ever say all, because of the variability and cost of production. So yes, and you can feel it.
Although I will say, if you can't be profitable at $12 beans, you might want to be looking at your operation.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Most of my cousins who farm in Southern Illinois, they got their land given to them from my uncles, and their cost of production is quite low. So I'm going to get Christmas presents this year from them because they're happy. But yeah, you can feel it. When I talk to a couple of seed company executives and salespeople within the industry, you could just tell it. They were breathing easier, and they just wanted to continue because we need higher net and cash farm income from what we said before. This won't be healed in 1 year. We need multiple years of this, John, and because that'll tend to resolve some of the issues relative to the dramatic reduction in working capital that we've seen since the peak in 2012.
But it's not as bad, I think, as you and I might think. Again, I talked to an exec from Farm Credit and one from Compere that yesterday as part of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Trade Talk, and both said that that the financial picture of their lenders is much better than one might expect, given the last 4 or 5 years, that the vast majority are still in good shape. They've had to make some tough decisions over 2020, but they haven't been dire decisions, and they've been able to reduce costs in order to get things back in line. So,
the reduction, but you've got 40%, over 40% of the income is coming from taxpayer payments. On top of now, if you didn't sell, if you were a procrastinator in marketing, you're looking at what, $4 cash prices for corn. I can see that's why they're not having trouble, So, yes. But will this continue? If you pull out all that money in your spreadsheet for the 2021 crop, it gets concern again, at price levels. So, I don't want to put bad news on good news, but you've had a very significant boost in cash income as a result of both from the marketplace and huge amounts of income transfer payments.
Yeah, and my point is, because of that, we don't have a big hole to dig ourselves out of, like coming out of the early 80s.
Absolutely.
That the whole really is that there's been a lot of deferments in capital investments, and now that there's money coming in, those capital investments are going to be made, which is going to be good for the overall ag economy. Now, your point is very well taken that we'll have to wait and see what 2021 brings. Hopefully, it is, as you pointed out, income from the market. But there's not going to be CFAP, there's not going to be MFP, and so it will be interesting to see what the 2021 growing season brings. But as we sit right now, people are pretty darn optimistic about it.
And you can lock in a somewhat profitable price for many for 2021 crops if you choose, where the last few years it's been harder to do that. So yes, we're on the right track here. We are on the right track. So again, what I always say, my father taught me, you can't go bankrupt making money. So be a prudent marketer. You know what your crop situation, your mix, and again, usually a rule of thumb is take your normal production and shave it down and at least get an initial hedge or two on that production. I mean, or at least lock in your non-postponable cost, your input cost, because you're going to have them. And that's how my family always worked. We knew what our costs were, so we hedged those, and then we could be a little more waiting for these higher prices if and when they come.
All right. Well, that was some good news there. Bad news is, Jim, I'm going to be sad. I'm going to not have to talk to you for a couple weeks.
Yes, I now I'm on to my Black Friday purchases. I'm the best thing for the U.S. economy. I subscribe to Tavala. That's this meat. I mean, that's this the dinner ordering service, but they dropped the price of their excellent steam and convection oven to only $99. So I took the bait. So you're going to see a thinner me in 2021. My doctor says I will do it. So that's going to lead me to do it. So yeah, I'm
There's your signal for next week.
That's my signal for the next year. It's going to take a while, but we've got, look at the positives. We mentioned the ag markets. We mentioned the trade agreements are coming. I think you're going to see a U.S.-UK trade agreement. China continues to buy corn and soybeans. We have several very effective, it looks like, vaccines coming out with the distribution pattern that I personally think will surprise people in the year 2021. So yeah, there are things to be thankful for. We've been through a hell of a year, okay? But we've got some positive things to end it.
Indeed. All right, Jim, thanks. Been great talking with you this week. All right. And again, a reminder, we won't be here next week, but come back in 2 weeks, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. Join us on the AgriTalk Facebook page for more DC Signal to Noise.